Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the squelchy, splintery shoes of a medieval peasant. Imagine this: you wake up before dawn, coughing, in a dark, smoky room that smells like moldy hay-burnt cabbage and, yep, that's definitely a goat in your bed. You're cold, itchy, and already tired, even though your day hasn't technically begun. Welcome to the Middle Ages. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are, so drop that in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge out from under your straw mattress, which isn't really a mattress at all. It's a pile of old, flattened rushes stuffed into a rough sack if you're lucky. Otherwise, it's just a blanket on a dirt floor. Your house, if we're feeling generous with the word house, is a one-room, timber-framed hut covered in daub and wattle. Basically, a medieval attempt at insulation made from mud straw and manure. Spoiler alert, it doesn't work. In the winter, the cold punches through the walls like an angry ghost. In the summer, flies swarm in through the holes in the thatched roof, which leaks when it rains, and it rains a lot. You share this tiny space with your entire family. Maybe 7 or 8 people, depending on how many babies survived last winter. There's no privacy. You know everyone's breath pattern. You know who snores, who kicks, and who talks in their sleep about bread. You also share it with animals, chickens, scratching around your feet, maybe a pig or two, and sometimes a goat. Not because you love animals, but because you need them alive and close so they don't get stolen or freeze to death. Congratulations, your bedmate might be a goose. There's a central hearth, not because it's cozy, but because it's literally the only heat source. It has no chimney, so smoke just drifts upward and hovers around the ceiling before seeping out through a hole in the roof. This means your eyes sting, your lungs wheeze, and your clothes permanently smell like a barbecue gone wrong. Historians still argue whether the constant smoke helped preserve thatch roofs or just peasants' lungs in a slow, cooked kind of way. The floor is dirt. Not rustic earthenware chic dirt, just dirt. Sometimes with straw over it, but that gets wet and turns into a kind of indoor compost. Bugs love it. Fleas, lice, and the occasional mouse are your roommates. You scratch. A lot. The word vermin feels personal. You're basically an all-you-can-eat buffet for every itchy thing that crawls, hops, or bites. Getting dressed is simple. You own one tunic. You slept in it. You work in it. You will probably be buried in it. Made of coarse wool that never quite dries once it gets wet, and it always gets wet. It smells like rain-soaked sheep. Socks. LOL. Underwear only if you're royalty. And shoes. Maybe wooden clogs or leather scraps if you haven't worn through them yet. But barefoot is just normal. There's no mirror. The closest you get is a puddle. You have no idea what you look like, and that's honestly for the best. Hygiene is not a concept that's really caught on yet. There's no toothpaste, no toothbrush, and no running water. You rinse your face in a bucket. Or not. Who has time? Breakfast is still hours away. First, you need to collect water. Your village doesn't have plumbing. There's a communal well, or worse, a stream. You walk to it with a heavy wooden bucket and hope no one upstream just dunked a dead squirrel in it. Giardia, never heard of it. Typhoid, just the usual tummy ache. You're probably wondering about the toilet. That's adorable. It's called the midden, and it's just a designated poop hole somewhere near the edge of your yard. Some villages use shared latrines, which are basically wooden benches over a pit. There's no toilet paper, just leaves moss or a communal rag. Yes, you heard that right. One rag. Washed weekly. Maybe. In the same river you just drank from. Sometimes the chamber pot is emptied right into the street where it mingles with pig droppings, rotting vegetable scraps, and whatever the blacksmith dumped yesterday. And that's your shortcut to church. Watch your step. Most peasant houses are grouped close together, creating narrow alleys full of mud smoke and gossip. Your neighbors know everything about you, including what time you coughed during the night, and who you're secretly flirting with. Don't worry, she's already married. Privacy isn't just a luxury, it's a foreign concept, and yet you keep going. You wake up in this unwashed chaos every day because there's work to do, and if you're not working, you're not eating. Simple as that. The Lord who owns your land expects his dues, and your stomach expects at least a crust of something that's not moldy. One of them is going to be disappointed. But for now, you shuffle outside in the gray morning, squinting against the cold, pulling your hood up against the drizzle, and stepping into another day of medieval peasant life. You're tired, underfed, itchy, and vaguely resentful. And this is literally just the first 10 minutes of your day. You shuffle to the table if a single wooden plank resting on stumps even counts as a table. It's early, maybe just past sunrise, and your stomach is already protesting like it's trying to join a rebellion. Breakfast is coming, but don't get your hopes up. There's no bacon sizzling, no warm cinnamon rolls, no coffee unless you count yesterday's boiled nettle water. What you do have is a crust of yesterday's bread. Maybe. It's rough rye heavy and already growing a little fuzzy around the edges, but hey, mold is protein, right? The bread is dense and hard enough to be classified as a blunt weapon. You bang it on the table, and it makes a noise suspiciously close to wood on wood. That's breakfast. If you're lucky, someone in your family has managed to cook up a weak porridge. Oats water, and maybe a pinch of salt if your household has been on a spice-winning streak. It tastes like sadness, but it's warm. That counts for something. Maybe there's a sliver of turnip or onion floating in there like a lonely boat on a murky sea. You fish it out with reverence. This is how you start most days, hungry and a little disappointed. You chew slowly, partly to make the food last, but also because your teeth are already failing you. Dental hygiene. Not a thing. No brushes, no floss, and sugar hasn't invaded Europe yet, so that's one blessing. But your enamel's still fighting a losing battle. Bread, baked with stone-ground flour, contains enough grit to wear down your teeth like sandpaper. By your mid-30s, if you're still alive, you might be gumming your way through meals like a baby bird. Your village might share an oven, communal baking is a thing. You bring your shaped dough to the Lord's oven, pay a little fee, and hope it comes out unburnt and unstolen. But let's be honest, food theft happens. If your neighbor's loaf looks tastier, you're going to give it side-eye. Historians still argue whether peasants regularly sabotaged each other's baking turns. Was it petty rivalry or just honest mix-ups? We may never know. Breakfast also depends on the season. In summer, you might have a bit more. Some berries a fresh egg, maybe a crumb of goat cheese. In winter, you're just scraping the bottom of whatever dried-up barrel still has crumbs in it. Salted meat is rare and mostly for the rich. You might get a sliver on a holiday if your lord feels generous or has leftovers. Let's talk ale. You might be sipping a watered-down version of it right now, even for breakfast. Why? Because water isn't always safe. Boiling it takes time and fuel, And remember, firewood isn't unlimited. Ale is brewed and mildly alcoholic, which kills some germs, so even the kids drink it. It's like soda for the 1300s, flat, warm, and oddly comforting. You don't get tipsy, just hydrated. Sort of. As you chew, the room slowly brightens. The fire is smoldering. The smoke clings to your hair, your clothes, your soul. Someone sneezes. Someone else coughs. The air smells of old wool-damp straw and the lingering fart of last night's beans. There's no Febreze. You just live in it. Your kids, if you have them, are already fighting over who gets the end crust. The heel of the loaf is a rare treat because it's usually a little softer. You settle the dispute with a glance or maybe a quick smack, not maliciously, just the medieval version of a gentle reminder. Hunger is your default setting. You're never really full, just various shades of not starving. Most peasants consume between 2,000 and 3,000 calories a day, which sounds fine until you realize they burn nearly all of it just staying alive and working non-stop. And those calories are not exciting ones, just heavy bread legumes and root vegetables over and over and over again. Meat. Almost never. Fish. Maybe during Lent if you live near a stream and own a net, and your lord hasn't claimed fishing rights. Dairy. If your goat is cooperative. Ever heard of pottage? It's your culinary best friend, and also your worst enemy. A thick stew of whatever's available. Barley peas, cabbage, turnips, and herbs you're 70% sure aren't poisonous. Sometimes it stews for days, constantly reheated and retopped. It tastes like whatever you had too much of in the garden last week. Think of it as a medieval smoothie, except chunky hot and tragically beige. And you better not complain. Not just because it's rude, but because everyone else is in the same sinking turnip boat. You whine about your meal, and someone nearby is already burying a child who starved last winter. Misery loves company, and in a medieval village, company's all you've got. Breakfast is short because it has to be. There's no time to linger, no cozy mugs of cocoa, no long chats about your dreams. You eat quickly, scrape the bowl, and start prepping for the day's labor. If you dawdle, the field won't plow itself. And your lord. He doesn't tolerate slackers. Your land comes with conditions and back-breaking obligations. Some mornings there's no food at all. Nothing left, no bread, no pottage, just hunger. Maybe you go forage. Maybe you skip the meal and hope someone shares later. Fasting isn't just a spiritual practice, it's survival mode. And that grumble in your belly, it's as familiar to you as your own heartbeat. A quirky side note, some households believed bread should always be cut, not torn. Tearing it invited bad luck or worse spirits. So even your sad little crust came with a side of superstition. Also, bread was sometimes marked with a cross before baking. Was it religious protective? Both historians still debate the meaning, but either way your breakfast had theology baked right in. The cold seeps in as you stand. Your stomach isn't satisfied, but it's done negotiating. It knows better than to ask for more. You step out into the chill morning, brushing crumbs off your tunic and trying not to trip over a chicken. One crust down 12 hours of labor to go. Your breath fogs the air as you step outside the chill, biting at your fingers, even through your coarse wool sleeves. The sky is a dull gray smear, and the earth beneath your feet is already half mud, half manure. There's no time to enjoy or resent the scenery. You've got work to do, and by work we mean relentless, soul-numbing toil from dawn until you're too exhausted to stand. Welcome to the medieval peasant's job description, everything. Farming, building, hauling, mending, foraging, shepherding, if it's a verb, you're doing it. There are no weekends, no vacations, and definitely no quitting. You're not just working to live, you're working not to immediately die. Your first stop is the field. Or maybe several. You don't own it, of course, it technically belongs to the Lord. You're just borrowing it under the condition that you give him a chunk of everything it produces. This charming setup is called the manorial system. Historians call it a cornerstone of medieval society. You might call it free labor with extra steps. You carry a wooden plow or drag it with the help of an ox if your family's doing well. If not, guess who's the ox today? You. The plow is heavy, awkward, and about as ergonomic as a tree branch. It digs into the earth in an uneven, reluctant way, making you wish you were born a beetle instead. The soil is rarely generous. Depending on the season, it's either rock-hard or waterlogged. You struggle to coax wheat, barley, rye, or oats from it. Fertilizer. That's a luxury word. You're using manure yours or the animals. Either way, it smells the same and there's never quite enough of it. You bend, stoop, lift, hack. Your hands are blistered. Your back is on fire and your knees crackle like dry twigs every time you squat. There's no protective gear. Your tunic is your work uniform, sleepwear, formal attire, and raincoat all rolled into one. And yes, rain. It shows up whether you want it or not, and it turns your work site into a pit of despair. Mud sucks at your ankles. Tools slip in your grip. The straw in your boots squishes like swamp moss. But you keep going, because the harvest won't wait. And if it fails, spoiler alert, it fails a lot, then you and your family get to play the "which root can we gnaw for dinner" game. Mid-morning, you take a quick pause to gulp some ale or gnaw another piece of bread if you packed any. Not because you're done, just so you don't pass out. Your break spot might be a fallen log or the shady side of a haystack. Not scenic, not comfortable, just slightly less terrible. Remember, you're not just feeding your own family. You're fulfilling duties. The Lord gets a share. The church gets a share. You get what's left, if anything. One mainstream fact: a typical peasant owed several days of forced labor every week to the local lord on top of paying rent and tithes. Basically, you're working full-time just to afford to work part-time for yourself. Fun, and then there's the corvée. That's a fancy word for mandatory unpaid labor, often for repairing roads or the Lord's house. Oh, a tree fell across the path to the manor. Guess who's dragging it away with his bare hands and one functioning boot? That's right, it's you again. Sometimes the Lord gets creative. You might be ordered to help build a wall, dig a moat, or even construct a pigeon tower. No, really, lords liked their pigeons. Not because they were cute, but because they were tasty. You're laboring for someone else's luxury bird buffet. Your life is basically one long unpaid internship with no chance of promotion. On days when you're not in the field, you're still not free. You might be mending fences, tending livestock, gathering firewood, or weaving baskets. And if you're a woman, you're doing all of that, plus cooking, cleaning, spinning wool, and trying to keep 6 kids alive while holding a toddler and stirring a pot with your foot. Quirky fact: Breaksome peasants worked as bird scarers, a full-time job that involved running through fields, flapping your arms, and yelling at crows. That's it. No benefits, no holidays. Just you and the birds. Historians still argue whether children were employed for this purpose because they were cheaper or just more enthusiastic about yelling. As the sun crawls across the sky, your muscles ache in places you forgot existed. Every hour feels like 3. You have no clock. You tell time by the sun or how close you are to collapsing. Noon is just when the shadows start hiding under you. You might sing while you work, not because you're happy, but because it keeps your brain from melting. Work songs are part rhythm, part distraction, and part defiance. Yes, my life is terrible, they seem to hum, but at least this tune slaps. There's always a looming pressure due enough to survive, but not so much that you get noticed. If your harvest is too good, the Lord might raise your rent. If it's too bad, you might starve. It's a delicate, miserable tightrope walk, and you're barefoot on a windy day. And don't forget about accidents. Tools break. People fall. A twisted ankle might mean weeks of uselessness and no one's picking up your slack. There's no workers' comp, just the vague hope that your cousin will remember how to plant onions without killing them. As the afternoon wanes, your body screams for rest, but there's no choice. You've got to finish sowing, or the whole field's a loss. There's no tractor, no irrigation, no pesticides, just you, your aching limbs, and a prayer that the next plague of locusts skips your postcode. Eventually, the light fades. Your tunic is soaked in sweat mud and disappointment. You drag yourself home each step heavier than the last, knowing that tomorrow is exactly the same. Because this isn't a rough day. This is every day. The sun slips behind the trees as you limp home, every part of you throbbing, like it's been personally offended by the concept of movement. Your fingers are cracked, your back's throwing a protest march, and your feet. Well, your feet have gone numb, which is actually the most merciful thing to happen all day. You reach your cottage, if we can call 4 leaning walls, and a hay-stuffed roof a cottage, and push open the door into a room that's somehow colder inside than it is out. There's no welcome mat, no scented candles, just the familiar smell of damp straw smoke and someone's attempt at soup. Home, sweet medieval home. Inside, the family huddles around a hearth that's doing its best to pretend it's a fire. It crackles like a nervous whisper and doesn't give off much heat unless you sit close enough to set your tunic on fire. Which, depending on your mood, may or may not sound appealing right now. Dinner's cooking, or at least warming. It's probably pottage again, because what else is there? Maybe someone bartered for a bit of onion or found some edible greens in the hedgerow. You sniff the air. Yup, definitely turnips. Again. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants had a varied enough diet to stay healthy year-round. The evidence leans toward not unless they were very lucky and had unusually generous lords or miracle gardens. You sit down or collapse more accurately onto a rickety stool. The furniture is handmade in the sense that someone once looked at a tree and said, "This will do." Everything is wooden, creaky warped, and probably splintery. If you're careful, the stool won't collapse under you. If it does, at least you're close to the floor already. Someone hands you a wooden bowl with a chunk of bread floating like a sad island in a thick stew. It's warm, and that's enough. You eat quietly, watching the fire flicker across the soot-stained walls. There's no glass in the window, just a shutter. When the wind blows, it whistles through the gaps and makes your candle flicker like it's telling ghost stories. Around you, the household settles. If you're lucky, you're in a small nuclear family. If not, you might be sharing your space with cousins, grandparents, in-laws, and a few assorted stragglers who never left. Privacy. That's hilarious. Even the pigs in the pen outside get more alone time than you. Your kids play near the fire, tossing pebbles or sticks or just staring into the flame like it owes them an answer. They're dirty, noisy, and more resilient than you'd think. Their toys are simple twig stones, maybe a wooden doll if someone was feeling crafty. No screens, no bedtime cartoons. Just each other imagination and the occasional rat for company. Yes, rats, and mice, and fleas. They're the other permanent residents of your home whether you like it or not. You've probably gotten used to them by now. You flick one off your sleeve absent-mindedly. Bedding straw may be stuffed in sacks or just spread on the floor. Soft if you're lucky. Infested always. You don't complain. No one else has it better. You take your boots off carefully because the laces are stiff and your feet are swollen. The straw insulation inside has turned to mush. You wonder if the blister on your heel has finally become sentient. One quirky fact, peasants sometimes stuffed their shoes with moss or even wool scraps when straw wasn't available. Not exactly orthopedic, but better than walking barefoot through a frozen dung pile. After dinner, you might chat with your family, mumble a prayer, or tend to some household tasks. Maybe you mend a tear in your tunic or twist more fiber into thread for weaving. There's no artificial light, so anything involving your eyes is on borrowed time. Once the sun's gone and the candle burns low, you're basically done for the day because you literally can't see. If you're feeling fancy, you might burn a rushlight, a thin strip of dried reed dipped in fat set into a holder. It burns fast, stinks a bit, and is incredibly flammable. One sneeze, and there goes your roof. Still, it's something. You cradle it like it's gold. There's no evening entertainment in the Netflix sense. If someone has a story to tell you, gather close. Oral storytelling is the medieval movie night with tales of saints giants and trickster foxes. Historians still debate how much literacy actually existed in rural villages, but everyone agrees stories were currency. The person who could make you forget your aching back with a well-timed tale worth their weight in grain. Eventually, people start curling up on their straw piles, wrapping themselves in threadbare blankets or spare tunics. You join them. There's no mattress, just flattened sacks of chaff and your own exhaustion. You lie there staring at the rafters if you're lucky enough to have a ceiling not falling apart. And listen, you hear mice scrabbling in the corners, the wind pressing against the shutter like it wants in. A neighbor coughing through the thin wall. Someone snoring like a small volcano. You shift, trying to find a spot where the straw doesn't poke your ribs. It's a game you never win. If it's winter, the cold creeps under every layer. You huddle closer to your spouse, your kids, anyone warm and breathing, bodies stacked like logs for warmth. And still your nose goes numb. The fire dies down, the dark presses in, and somewhere a dog barks. Maybe it's yours, maybe it's the Lord's. Maybe it's just howling. For the same reason you feel like howling sometimes. One more thing before you drift off the latrine. Or lack thereof. Your house probably doesn't have one. If you have to go, you use a chamber pot or sneak outside to the village ditch. Privacy is not a concern. Smell is not avoidable. You learn to live with it, or rather in it. So you curl up in your itchy blanket stomach, half full of turnip stew, body aching from a day of labor, head buzzing with worry about tomorrow. Will it rain? Will the harvest fail? Will the Lord ask for another day of corvée? You close your eyes and hope for dreams that don't involve wheat blight or hungry wolves. Sleep comes not because you're ready, but because you have no choice. Your body simply gives up. It's not the rooster that wakes you. It's the cold. That distinct soul-piercing chill that seeps under your blanket, your tunic, your skin, and makes you question all your life choices, including being born. You open your eyes to the same sight as every morning, the wooden beams above your head, a bit of straw stuck to your cheek, and someone's elbow far too close to your ribs. You groan. Quietly, though. Everyone else is still asleep, and the last thing you want is to start your day being yelled at for waking the baby. You sit up. Stretch if your body allows it. Your joints creak like the door of a haunted castle. Welcome to the morning routine of a medieval peasant. There is no leisurely breakfast, no scented bath, no morning scroll through funny videos. Instead, you shuffle outside, squinting into the dawn light, and get right to work. First task: deal with the animals. They're not going to feed themselves. Well, okay, the pigs will try to feed themselves, including on your belongings, but you're here to keep them from making that a habit. You step into the tiny pen, which is really just a fenced mud pit, and start the daily ritual of bribing your livestock with scraps. The pigs grunt. The chickens scatter. One of them eyes you with suspicion, probably because you chased it with a stick yesterday. The cow, if your family is lucky enough to own one, needs milking, and she's never in the mood. One mainstream fact-owning livestock was rare and valuable. A single cow could mean milk butter and status. But most peasants had to share animals communally, or borrow them from the manor. And when animals got sick, which they often did, there were no medieval veterinarians riding in with potions and pep talks. Just prayers and crossed fingers. You haul buckets of water from the nearest stream or village well. It's cold. It's heavy. You spill half of it on your tunic, which is now clinging wetly to your shins. Great start. The water gets used for everything: cooking, drinking, maybe even washing if you're feeling brave. Bathing is, let's say, optional. Soap exists, sure made from ash and animal fat, but it's harsh and rare. Most peasants only bathed a few times a year. Cleanliness wasn't next to godliness, it was next to impossible. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants smelled as awful as modern stereotypes suggest, or if they developed better hygiene practices than we give them credit for. Honestly, judging by your armpits right now, we'll leave that one undecided. You wash your face with cold water, which wakes you up faster than caffeine ever could. Then it's time to eat, which is a loose term. Breakfast is likely more stale bread, maybe soaked in ale if you want to soften it. Butter or cheese if you're very lucky. No one's scrambling eggs or flipping pancakes. You eat standing up, chewing slowly, eyes half closed. It's fuel, that's all. Then you check the to-do list in your brain. Fix the fence where the pig got out yesterday. Carry thatch from the field for roof repairs. Help the neighbors slaughter their goat. You might get a piece of it, and patch the hole in your wall that's been letting in the wind and possibly squirrels. You're also supposed to help gather firewood for the parish priest. That's not optional. God is watching. And so is Father Ulrich. You split your time between your own needs and those of the manor. Remember, you don't own your labor. You owe it. So off you go, dragging your tools to the Lord's grain store to help repair the thatched roof with other villagers. You greet them with nods. No one's particularly cheerful because everyone's doing the same grueling shuffle. But there's comfort in shared misery. The jokes are dark. The laughter is tired. But it's something. Quirky tidbit: in some villages, people believed that whispering blessings to your tools could keep them from breaking. you murmur one to your hammer just in case. Superstition and practicality often overlap here like moss on a roof, thin, a little weird, and impossible to separate from the structure beneath. Once the Lord's work is done, if it ever is done, you hurry back to your own home to finish your tasks. You chop wood, stack it near the hearth, and scold the child who's tried to ride the goat again. Your spouse is tending to a torn tunic, stirring a pot, and glaring at a pile of unwashed dishes like it personally offended them. If it's market day, you might pack a few goods, a bundle of flax, some eggs, or a carved wooden spoon to trade. The walk to the market is long. Your boots are still damp. The road is rough. But the market is the one place where life almost feels like it has choices. The stalls are simple. No neon signs. Just burlap baskets and the occasional bard trying to earn a crust by singing about dragons. You trade some goods, eye the meat pies suspiciously, because what even is in them, and listen to the town crier announce whatever law or tax has just been invented. Spoiler, it's never good news. Back home, you help tend the garden. It's not decorative, it's survival. You grow leeks, cabbage, maybe some beans. The soil isn't generous and the insects are aggressive. You find a slug, chewing your lettuce and flick it into the ditch with a grunt. The slug probably wins more battles than you do. Some evenings you spend mending gear. Maybe you try to weave new baskets, repair the roof, or patch your tunic again with thread that frays faster than it sews. Other nights, if the priest allows it, you might sneak off to a nearby gathering, dancing, drinking, telling stories by firelight. Not often, but sometimes. There's music, crude instruments, flutes, drums, maybe a lute if someone's feeling rich. You clap along even if your hands ache. Just for a night you remember what it's like to laugh without looking over your shoulder. Historians still debate how much leisure time peasants really had. Some argue they found small moments of joy amid the drudgery. Others think even those were swallowed by fatigue. Maybe it depends on the village, or the weather, or whether your boots were dry that day. Eventually, you shuffle home again. Your muscles burn. Your stomach grumbles. You look up at the stars brilliant in a sky untouched by city lights, and wonder how the nobles can look at the same stars and still sleep soundly. The wind rustles the trees. The fire flickers in your hearth. You lie down again on the same straw, in the same tunic, in the same aching body. Tomorrow is coming. Again, you're dreaming of bread. Not the usual coarse loaf you gnaw on like a tired badger, but a fluffy, golden, fresh-baked masterpiece with butter melting into every crevice. You reach out, ready to tear off a piece, and wake up chewing on your own sleeve. Ah, medieval hunger. The recurring villain in your bedtime stories. Food isn't just a craving in your world. It's a constant calculation. What's left in the larder? Did the beans survive the frost? How many eggs did the hens lay? Is the flour barrel low enough to echo? As a peasant, you don't eat when you're hungry. You eat when there's something to eat. This morning, there's gruel. Again. It's as gray and unexciting as the sky outside. A mush of oats and water barely salted and definitely overcooked, because what else are you going to do while waiting for the fire to warm up your fingers? You spoon it down anyway. Calories are currency. And, speaking of currency, you don't have any. Coins. Those shiny things the Lord's steward jingles around. They rarely touch your hand, unless you've done something unusual like tanning a hide for a traveling merchant or catching a really fat trout and selling it under the table. The economy here is mostly barter. You trade eggs for bread, wool for herbs, a day of plowing for a strip of leather. It's a constant dance of you scratch my back, I'll stitch your tunic, and nobody keeps perfect track until someone does. Because if there's one person who absolutely is keeping track, it's the steward. The Lord's steward, that is. He's the guy with the fancy ledger, the smug smirk, and the unfortunate habit of showing up right after a bad harvest. He's not here to make friends. He's here to count grain-enforced dues and remind you that surprise you still owe a dozen eggs and a goat's worth of wool. You groan quietly. You already gave the eggs. Your hen laid 3 and then retired from productivity like a feathered diva. Still, the dues must be paid, even if it means giving up the very last of your barley stores, which you do reluctantly, knowing full well you'll be eating boiled nettles by week's end. Mainstream fact peasants were required to pay taxes in the form of goods and labor. These included tithes to the church 1/10 of everything you produce fees, to use the Lord's mill or bakehouse, and boon work unpaid extra labor during planting and harvest season. That's right. The more there was to do, the more you were called to help. Generous, right? You trudge to the granary with your measly sack where the steward waits with a tally stick and an expression like he just sniffed bad cheese. He scratches a mark, nods, and dismisses you like an underwhelming turnip. No thank you. No smile. Just you still owe 2 hens by Michaelmas. You mutter something unprintable under your breath. PG-13, of course. Back home, your family looks at you with quiet dread. The stores are almost empty, and it's not even winter yet. Time to forage. You strap on your belt, grab a sack, and head into the woods where you become a temporary expert in mushrooms, berries, and edible weeds. You've learned mostly the hard way what you can eat without hallucinating that your goat is a talking knight. Wild garlic dandelions, hazelnuts if you're lucky. The forest gives, but it also takes. A thorn scratches your hand. A squirrel throws something at your head. Probably a conspiracy. You pause at the sight of another peasant, Bertha, crouching in the underbrush with a basket of stinging nettles and a knife. She glances at you, offers a half smile, and says, "Only found 5 snails today. Tough year." You nod. Tough century, really. Foraging is survival. It's also a reminder of your social place. Because if you're caught picking berries in the wrong part of the woods, say the Lord's private hunting ground, you could be fined, whipped, or worse. Historians still argue whether some lords turned a blind eye to starving peasants foraging on their land, or if they enforced forest laws with brutal consistency. Either way, you don't stick around long. On the way back, you pass the village bakehouse. The smell is heavenly roasted wheat and warm air, and you suddenly remember one cruel, quirky tradition. If you want to bake your bread, you have to pay the Lord's fee. You're not allowed to build your own oven. That's right. Even heating food is a taxable event. The idea was to keep control over fire and reduce accidental burnings of the entire village, which was very flammable. But it also ensured the Lord profited from your every crumb. And you'd better not skimp. Bakehouse fraud was a punishable offense. One woman once got fined for baking a cake in her chimney. Back home, you empty your foraging sack. A handful of greens, a few nuts, some old apples, and a hopeful mushroom. Dinner's going to be botanical. You boil everything into a greenish soup that tastes like disappointment and slightly singed thyme. Still, it's warm. It fills the stomach. You call the kids over, and everyone spoons it up with that blank look of, at least it's not gruel. Once the sun dips low, your mind starts wandering toward the worst-case scenarios. Because hunger isn't just a discomfort, it's a threat. Famine isn't rare. A bad harvest, a late frost, a flood. It doesn't take much to push your village over the edge. And when it happens, you'll be trading your tunic for a crust of bread and watching your neighbors boil shoe leather for soup. You've heard stories. Starving families wandering from village to village. Parents skipping meals so children could eat. Graveyards swelling. Roads lined with people too weak to walk. And when things got truly desperate, let's just say even acorns started looking delicious. You lie awake, stomach quietly growling, trying not to think about how little is left in the pantry. You close your eyes and imagine that fluffy golden loaf again, the one from your dream. Warm, yeasty, perfect. Then a mouse squeaks from the corner and reminds you even your dreams get taxed here. The rooster crows again, right on schedule, which is unfortunate because you were just drifting into a dream about eating stew with a wooden spoon that never ran out. You sit up and remember there is no stew. There's just another day of labor obligations and trying to outsmart your aches. But today's not just about surviving today. You've got to deal with authority. And not just the steward with his tally stick and general air of constipation. Today, the big boss himself, the lord of the manor, is coming to inspect the village. You groan. Not because you dislike him personally. You've probably never exchanged more than 10 words. But his arrival means tidying things lining up like livestock and pretending your roof doesn't leak directly onto your face at night. Let's rewind. What even is a manor? Imagine a slice of land carved up like a pizza, and you've got a little sliver to live and work on. Except the guy with the biggest slice doesn't do the dishes or plow fields. That's the Lord. He's a nobleman. Maybe a knight. Maybe just some guy who inherited a fancy title and he's been granted this land by someone even higher up, usually in exchange for military service. You're part of the package deal. Like the free wooden spoon that comes with a takeout meal, except you're doing all the stirring. Mainstream fact. Most peasants lived under the manorial system, a social and economic structure where the local lord had control over the land, the justice system, and even your personal freedoms. You couldn't leave the manor without permission. You couldn't marry someone from another village without his okay. Your life was quite literally part of his domain. You glance around the village. People are bustling more than usual, patching fences, brushing dirt off tunics, a losing battle, and shooing children away from the goat pen. The air feels tense. It's like cleaning your room when your distant uncle is visiting, and that uncle can throw you in the stocks if your garden looks untidy. The Lord arrives on horseback, flanked by a few retainers who look mildly bored but very well fed. He doesn't dismount, just surveys the scene with mild disinterest, like someone inspecting apples at a market. You bow. Everyone bows. Some villagers practically fold in half. It's not worship, it's survival. Quirky tidbit. In some manors, villagers were required to physically kneel and present symbolic offerings like a clump of dirt or a single egg during formal visits. Just a gentle reminder that you belonged to the land as much as the trees or the cows did. The Lord speaks briefly to the steward, who nods and scribbles something. Then he rides on, probably off to his stone hall with the fireplace big enough to roast a cow whole. Meanwhile, you return to your work, because when the nobility come and go, your life doesn't stop. It just bends around them, back to the fields. Today, you're helping a neighbor plow. His ox is lazy, his kids are too small, and you owe him for that time he lent you his ladder when your roof caved in during the snow. So, here you are, gripping the heavy wooden handle of the plow, guiding the blade through the reluctant soil. The ox snorts and moves like it has all the time in the world. You do not. Lean into it, someone calls, which is ironic because you've been leaning so hard you're basically horizontal. Historians still argue whether peasant labor was as constant and unrelenting as we imagine, or if seasonal breaks, church holidays, and communal work offered more respite than modern jobs. Some evidence suggests that peasants worked hard, but not always long hours, especially compared to today's office-bound schedules. Then again, you don't get coffee breaks or ergonomic chairs. Your hands are blistered. Your back feels like it's trying to retire early, and your stomach is threatening mutiny. Still, the work has to be done, not just for your field, but for the domain, the Lord's personal land. Yes, on top of maintaining your own strip of soil, you're also required to farm His, often without pay. It's a balancing act that feels suspiciously like falling over. Later, you hear shouting from the village green. Someone's been summoned to the manorial court. That's the local justice system run by the Lord or His appointed official. No fancy wigs or Latin phrases, just a gathering of villagers, some awkward silences, and the occasional fine for stealing firewood or letting pigs run loose and cause alarm. This time it's old Edwin. His sheep wandered into the Lord's barley again. Everyone pretends to be sympathetic, while also silently thanking their goats for staying home. Punishments vary. A fine, a public scolding, maybe a stint in the stocks if things escalate. You've seen it happen. One time, someone had to wear a wooden yoke shaped like a chicken for gossiping about the Reeves bald spot. Justice is not only local, it's deeply theatrical. Speaking of the Reeve, that's another authority figure you deal with daily. He's a peasant like you, but with power. He's in charge of making sure labor is done, fields are maintained, and everyone pays their dues. In theory, he's your representative. In practice, he's the one who tells you to work harder while sipping your ale. You sometimes wonder if the Reeve enjoys it a little too much. Then again, wouldn't you? Even the church is a form of authority you can't ignore. The local priest isn't just a spiritual guide. He's an enforcer of morality. A tax collector, remember the tithe, and sometimes the only literate person in your world. He tells you what's a sin, what's divine punishment, and what the stars might mean. You don't always believe him, but you always listen, because not listening gets you labeled a troublemaker, or worse, a heretic. And that's not a title you want. You sigh. Authority is layered here. The Lord rules your land. The steward rules your accounts. The reeve rules your labor. The priest rules your soul, and somehow you're expected to juggle all of them while chasing chickens and planting beans. You crawl into bed that night, utterly drained muscles throbbing from the plow brain, spinning from the day's rules, and heart quietly hoping you don't forget to pay someone something by next Tuesday, or else risk being shouted at in Latin. You close your eyes and dream not of stew this time, but of a world where you answer to no one and can plant your carrots wherever you like. Your sleep is never quite restful. Too many lumpy straw bits in the mattress. Too much cold creeping under the thatch. And, as always, too much noise this time. It's your neighbor's rooster going off hours before dawn, like he's the town crier for poultry-related anxiety. But you stir for a different reason, the bells. They ring from the chapel tower, distant but insistent. It's not Sunday. It's not a feast day. That can only mean one thing: someone has died. Again, you sit up slowly, the aches of yesterday's plowing still rippling through your spine. The air is damp. Your breath mists. The fire's gone out. And a slow dread settles over you because you already know whose house they'll be gathering at, and it's far too soon since their last illness. Welcome to the cycle of medieval sickness. The kind that strikes often, spreads fast, and leaves everyone whispering theories involving bad air sin, or possibly that one frog you found in the well last week. Mainstream fact medical understanding in the Middle Ages was a mix of classical texts, religious superstition, and a dash of folk wisdom. Most people believed illness was caused by imbalances in the four humors blood phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Yes, your body was essentially seen as a soup with too much pepper, or not enough salt. There's no village doctor, no clinic, just a mix of local herbalists, maybe a traveling barber surgeon if you're lucky or unlucky, depending on how sharp his knife is and how drunk he got before arriving. You remember once being told that to cure a cough you should eat a roasted hedgehog. For gout, wrap your feet in warm cabbage leaves. And, for more serious cases, bleed them. Because clearly what a weak, feverish person needs is less blood. This is what passes for health care. You pull on your tunic and head out into the muddy lane, passing a group of villagers, murmuring in that polite, respectful way people do when they don't know what to say. Death isn't shocking anymore. It's just frequent, expected even. You've seen children die before they could walk. Friends collapse in the field. A neighbor vanish into a coughing fit that lasted a week and ended in silence. You pass by the chapel and see the body wrapped in linen laid out on a plank. No coffin too expensive. Just a shroud of prayer, and the hope that the soul moves on to somewhere less drafty. The priest is already preparing for a burial. He looks tired. But then again, so does everyone here. Later, you sit near the hearth trying to warm your hands, sipping a bitter tisane, made from bark and old mint. Someone nearby mentions bad air. They say the smell in the marsh has changed. Another mutters that it's punishment for gossip or laziness or skipping last week's mass. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly believed sin caused illness, or if that explanation was more of a comfort, something to give structure to chaos. Either way, your options are limited. If you get sick, you stay home. If it's serious, you pray. If it gets worse, someone might walk to the next village for an herbalist, assuming they're not busy treating their own sick. And if that doesn't work, you get buried with your shoes off and your sins whispered over by the priest. It's not just disease, though. There are injuries, too. Farming isn't exactly a gentle profession. Tools are blunt. Animals are stubborn, and accidents are common. You once saw someone lose a toe to a plow blade. Another man got kicked so hard by a horse that his hip hasn't sat right since. No surgery, just pain a cane and a permanent limp. Quirky tidbit, barbers doubled as surgeons in many towns. They cut hair and opened veins. Their signs, a red and white pole, originally symbolized bloody bandages twisting in the wind. So, next time you get a trim, just be glad the stylist doesn't ask if you'd like a quick tooth pulled with that. But the real specter of death, the one that lives in every shadowed corner of your hut, is plague. You've only heard whispers. Tales from other villages' travelers passing through in hushed tones. A black sickness. Buboes the size of apples. People dead within days. Whole families gone before sundown. You don't know if it's coming here. You don't know if it's real. But the fear is. There's always a threat looming in the margins. Leprosy, smallpox, fever. Even a simple cut that festers can mean the end. And yet you live. You wake up, tend your goats, boil your turnips, tell your children to stay out of the muddy ditch. Because what else can you do? You find comfort in tiny rituals. The smell of rosemary crushed underfoot. The warmth of shared soup. The way your mother hums while stirring porridge, like if she just hums long enough, maybe you'll all make it through winter. Or at least through the week. One of your neighbors swears by rubbing garlic on their feet every night. Another places dried frogs in their rafters to keep the coughs away. It doesn't really matter if it works. It just matters that it feels like doing something. You've heard rumors, wild ones, about places where people boil silver coins to purify water. About monks in distant abbeys who distill special elixirs. About foreign lands where doctors wear strange beaked masks and carry flowers in their pockets. You don't know if they're real. But sometimes in the cold quiet of night you imagine what it would be like to live in one of those places even for a day. Your own family isn't untouched. Your youngest has a runny nose and a cough that won't quit. You watch helpless as they sleep fitfully, one hand clutching a wooden toy. You've brewed every herbal remedy you know. You've whispered every prayer you remember. You've made offerings at the chapel just in case, and still you worry. You tuck the child in with an extra blanket. Kiss their forehead. Then go outside to sit by the dying fire and stare at the stars, wondering what the universe thinks of all this. Wondering if someday someone will look back and try to understand how people lived like this. You want to shout at them, "We didn't live like this. We survived it." There's a difference. You wake to coughing. Not yours this time, but the rasping sound of someone outside, probably old Marta again, her lungs held together by grit and garlic. The morning light slices through the cracks in your shutters, and you lie there for a moment, too tired to move, wondering what fresh disaster today might bring. Because today is market day. Now that might sound like a treat, a break from toil, a splash of color in your sepia-toned peasant life. But in reality, market day is more like controlled chaos meets Hunger Games, minus the fireballs, plus a lot more turnips. You throw on your best shirt, which just means the least mended one, and gather up your meager trade goods. A basket of eggs if the hens cooperated, a lump of soft cheese you guarded like treasure from rats and your own children, and a few bundles of dried herbs. Not exactly merchant-class material, but it's what you've got. Mainstream fact, medieval peasants were often allowed to sell surplus goods like eggs, cheese wool, or vegetables at weekly markets, run by nearby towns or the manor itself. But they had to pay tolls for entry, and lords often took a cut from sales, especially if the market was within their domain. Think of it like a pop-up shop, where the landlord also skims your profits. You arrive at the market just as the sun climbs above the treetops. It's already loud, people shouting, children, underfoot goats, making that horrible screaming sound that always makes you check if someone's being murdered. Stalls made from crooked planks lean like tired men. Piles of onions fish in various states of death, dyed wool, carved spoons, pickled, who knows what, in cloudy jars, it's all here. You eye a woman selling bright ribbons. You haven't owned anything bright in years. She offers you a wink and a price that could buy a new chicken. You smile politely and walk away. There are more important things than ribbons, even if they would look really good braided in your daughter's hair. You find your usual spot on the fringe of the action and lay out your wares on a blanket that smells faintly of goat. People come and go inspecting your eggs like they're rare gems, squeezing your cheese in the least respectful way possible. Eventually, you make a few trades. some dried apples for your herbs, 2 eggs for a tiny pot of honey, a length of old rope for the cheese. It's not glamorous, but it might get you through the week. Then comes the taxman. You hear his bell before you see him clang, clang, like a cow announcing doom. He moves through the crowd like a bored shark holding his little wax tablet and a stylus sharpened to a point just passive-aggressive enough to make your spine twitch. He nods at your goods, jots something down, then mutters the toll fee. You hand it over. 1 egg and 1 coin. You're lucky you had both. He moves on without a word. Quirky tidbit. Some medieval towns charged separate tolls for your boots if you entered the market with footwear, considering it a sign of affluence. The poor learn to carry shoes and only wear them once inside. You shake your head. Nothing's free. Not your time, not your goods, not even your shoes. Next, you wander over to the animal pens. You don't have enough to buy anything, but you're checking prices. Maybe next week, if the hens keep laying, you could afford a new piglet. You stroke one's head, rough hair, clever eyes, the smell of everything it's ever eaten, and try not to fall in love. Then something catches your ear. News. A trader from a coastal town is talking loudly, clearly enjoying the attention. He claims a ship just arrived from France carrying not just wine but glassware. Actual cups with colored rims and plates that shine. You can't even picture it. You eat from wood, or occasionally flat bread if you're feeling fancy. Glass is for nobility, or maybe angels, but it's not the goods that stick with you, it's his stories. He talks about wars abroad, kings bickering over land, and a bishop who disappeared under mysterious circumstances. People crowd around him, hungry not for the salted eels he's selling, but the glimpse of a world beyond your hedgerows. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants were truly cut off from broader world affairs, or whether markets and wandering traders acted as early social networks, spreading news faster than we'd expect. You don't have parchment or posts, but gossip flies. You wander further passing booths of the manor's officials. They've set up a way station checking fairness, or more likely ensuring their own interests are protected. A man is arguing about the short wait on his flour. Another gets fined for selling cloth dyed with something that turned a customer's hands purple. There's no receipt, no manager, just loud voices and the occasional threat of the stocks. You pause by the spice merchant's stall. His goods are kept under cloth, precious and rare. He lets you sniff a pouch of cinnamon, and for a moment your world explodes. Warmth, sweetness, the hint of something far away and impossible. You thank him. He tells you a single pinch costs more than your best chicken. You back away. Still for a moment the scent lingers. Before leaving, you make one last stop, the ale tent. You trade your last bundle of dried mint for a single cup. It's warm, a bit sour, and slightly flat. But it's ale. And after the week you've had, it's practically medicine. You sit on a log drink, slowly, and watch the bustle fade as afternoon stretches into early evening. Chickens squawk from baskets. Children chase one another through the dust. The bell rings again, this time signaling the end. You head home with your smaller basket and slightly heavier heart. Your trades were decent, but not enough. Never quite enough. But market day isn't just about buying and selling. It's about seeing, hearing, remembering that other people live, struggle, laugh, and cry just like you. That your tiny life is part of something larger, messier, louder. You tuck the honey jar into a high shelf when you get home. It's for winter, or a bad cough, Or maybe just a day when everything feels a little too gray. Because some days even just a spoonful of sweetness is a kind of hope. Your hands ache. Your knees ache. Even your hair seems to ache somehow. But it's not time to stop. The sun still hangs above the tree line, and there are weeds in the garden like little green invaders marching through your cabbage rows without a care in the world. You kneel in the dirt and start pulling them up one by one, flicking worms off the roots and brushing spiders from your sleeves. The work is slow, repetitive, and oddly meditative until you hear a shout. Not the usual kind. Not a child chasing a chicken or someone yelling about borrowed tools. This is sharp commanding. It's the reeve, and that means it's labor service time again. You sigh, brush the soil from your knees, and trudge up the lane. Because this is not a democracy. It's a manorial system, and your body is part of the rent. Mainstream fact. Most medieval peasants were bound to the land under the feudal system. In exchange for a plot of land to farm, they owed labor services working the Lord's fields for free several days each week, plus additional tasks during harvest or emergencies. It's like having a side job you can't quit, doesn't pay, and your boss lives in a fortified house on a hill. Today, you're ordered to help repair the Lord's sheep pen. The fence has fallen again, no surprise considering the posts are older than your grandfather's teeth, and the sheep have been wandering dangerously close to the river. Last time, one fell in. The whole village had roast for a week. That's not happening again, apparently. You, along with 6 others, are handed tools, crude hammers, splintery planks, and rusted nails. No gloves. No safety instructions. Just a vague gesture and a get-on-with-it shrug. As you work, a familiar rhythm sets in. Bang. Curse. Bang. Shake your hand out. Bang again. Someone slices their palm. Someone else tries to flirt inappropriately while holding a fence post. It's exhausting, but also oddly communal. You may hate this obligation, but you don't hate the people you're stuck with. Nearby, the bailiff watches eyes like flint arms crossed one hand, always too close to his cudgel. He's not a bad man exactly, just a professional buzzkill whose job is to make sure you don't slack off. He takes his role very seriously. Once you got caught leaning too long on a shovel and were fined 2 eggs. You're still mad about it. Quirky tidbit. Some manners kept detailed records of every peasant's labor obligations, right down to how many nails they hammered, or how often they showed up late. One famous 13th century register even fined a man for breaking wind during the Lord's prayers. Apparently, even your bodily functions weren't beyond scrutiny. By midday, your arms feel like soggy noodles, and you've got a splinter the size of a quill pen wedged under your thumbnail. But the fence is up. The sheep stare at it with mild disapproval, but seem unlikely to challenge it for now. The reeve, bless his smug little beard, nods in approval, and dismisses you all with a wave. You return home sore and dusty, just in time to find your children attempting to cook a snail on a hot stone. You redirect them toward less adventurous snacks and collapse onto the nearest wooden bench. But the day's not over. Tomorrow, you owe Boone work a particularly grim version of labor service reserved for harvest time or emergencies. The Lord's fields take priority over your own, and you'll be out there scythe in hand from sun-up to sundown. If your own crops wilt during that time, tough luck. The manor doesn't accept excuses. Historians still argue whether labor obligations were as soul-crushing as they sound, or if peasants sometimes found ways to negotiate or cheat the system, delaying tasks, swapping shifts, or strategically falling ill on the worst days. you've seen both. Some folks practically vanish when harvest comes. Others are strangely chipper about hauling hay. Either way, the manor always gets its due eventually. And don't even get started on tallage, those occasional extra payments the Lord demands for reasons as varied as his daughter got married, or he's visiting a tournament and wants a nicer tent. You get no say in the matter. Just a summons and a demand for coins or goods if you're too broke. Which, let's face it, you usually are. One time the manor held a Harriet, a kind of death tax when old Thomas passed away. They took his best cow. His widow wept. The rest of you stared at the ground, silent and angry. But no one said a word. What could you say? It was the system. Cruel, yes, but established. Still, there are moments, strange, rebellious little flickers, when you and your neighbors whisper of ways to work smarter. Someone makes up an imaginary cousin and claims to be visiting just to skip a day. Another bribes a steward with a wedge of cheese to forget their name on the work list. Small victories, but they matter. You think about that as you stir the evening porridge oats and onions again, because your pantry is about as exciting as a monk's wardrobe. You think about the lords and their halls, their fireplaces and feasts, about how your sweat feeds their tables, about how their sons wear velvet while yours chase rats barefoot, and you wonder, will it always be this way? Probably, but still you imagine, just for a second, a world where your labor earns wages, where your time belongs to you, where your hands build for your own family, not someone else's glory. That world doesn't exist here. But maybe, just maybe, it will someday. For now, you finish your porridge, kiss your children good night, and stretch your back against the wall where the stones still hold the heat of the day. Tomorrow, the Lord's barley field waits. So do the weeds in your own plot. The trick, as always, is surviving both without losing what's left of your spirit, because you can take the toil. You can take the bruises, the mud, even the bailiff's constant stink-eye. But what you won't give up is dignity, even if it's just holding your head high while hauling a cart of someone else's cabbages. You wake before the rooster this time, partly because you're dreading the day ahead, and partly because the rooster's hiding from yesterday's goose. Honestly, that goose might be the boldest creature in your village. You envy her confidence. Today is one of those days that has a name, but not the fun kind. It's court day on the manor, and everyone must attend. That means dropping everything, your tools, your chores, your peace of mind, and hauling yourself to the manor's open-air court to stand for hours while the Lord's steward reads out laws, fines your neighbors, and occasionally throws someone in the stocks for stealing onions or insulting the Reeve's eyebrows. Yes, that happened, twice. Mainstream fact. The manorial court was the local legal body for most medieval peasants. It settled disputes, enforced local rules, and collected fines. The lord or his steward presided, and peasants were expected to show up not just as defendants or plaintiffs, but also as jurors, witnesses, or simply to be seen doing their duty. Absence. That could get you fined, too. So you trudge toward the manor's meeting space, usually just a cleared patch of ground near the Lord's hall, where a crude bench for the steward sits in judgment, and the rest of you stand in the mud. It rained last night, of course. Now it's puddles, gnats, and squelching boots for all. The bailiff is already there barking names. You nod, hoping yours won't be followed by the phrase, "Step forward." The last thing you need today is an accusation. The steward arrives. His cloak swishes like he practices swishing it. He climbs up on the bench, opens his book with exaggerated ceremony, and begins. The Latin sounds official. The tone sounds bored. He starts with fines. First up, Margaret for letting her pig wander into the priest's herb garden. Again. She protests that the pig is an independent spirit. The court is not amused. She's fined 2 hens. Next, your cousin is called out for raising his voice disrespectfully at the reeve. You distinctly remember that moment. It was during a dispute over whose bucket was whose. You also remember your cousin's voice cracking halfway through the tirade. The steward adds a small fine for that too. Unbecoming indignation, he calls it. Then comes land disputes. 2 brothers are fighting over a boundary stone that mysteriously moved overnight. Both swear the other did it. A neighbor chimes in to say his stone is missing altogether. The steward sighs deeply. He settles it by drawing new lines in the dirt with his staff and declaring them law until further disturbance. Quirky tidbit. Some manorial courts fined peasants for bizarre infractions, including baking underweight bread, not brewing ale properly, and even playing dice games on Sundays. One infamous record lists a man penalized for hiding a frog in another man's tunic as a jest. The court was not in the mood for humor. Then it happens. Your name, called clear as a bell. You step forward, heart pounding like it's trying to escape. Did someone accuse you of trespassing again? That one chicken definitely did cross onto Lord Bernard's rye field. Was that a crime now? No, it's worse. You've been selected for the jury. 12 villagers sworn in with a mumble and a shrug to judge the next case a theft. Someone stole 3 turnips and a basket from Widow Ellen's cart during market day. She's convinced it was her neighbor's son. He's convinced it was the traveling peddler. You're convinced you'd rather be anywhere else. Still, you listen. You squint. You ask the standard questions. You inspect the crime scene, which is basically a patch of dry grass with a single suspicious rut. After much mumbling and contradictory stories, the jury votes. It's not unanimous, but the steward declares the boy guilty enough. He's ordered to return the basket, pay a fine of 4 eggs, and publicly apologize. He mutters something that might be words and sulks off. Historians still argue whether manorial courts offered real justice to peasants or were merely tools of control for the lord. Some say the system allowed a surprising amount of self-governance. Others argue that it was rigged, arbitrary, and brutally biased toward protecting the manor's interests. You standing ankle-deep in mud, while your feet go numb, are leaning toward the latter. Finally, the court shifts to tenancy matters. A man has died, and his son petitions to inherit the strip of land. The steward flips through his records, squinting. He asks if the son paid the Harriet the death duty. He has. A goat and a jug of ale. The transfer is approved, and the son is now a tenant in his own right. There's a small, quiet ripple of envy. Land, even a little of it, means something. By mid-afternoon, the steward closes the court with a final flourish and a prayer that's half Latin, half snore. People begin to shuffle off, comparing fines, grumbling about injustice, or laughing about the pig again. You linger for a second. Not out of duty, just exhaustion. On your way home, you pass a group of children reenacting the court. One is the steward yelling about someone's improper poultry. Another plays the pig. You chuckle. Even in absurdity, there's something comforting about ritual. Even if the system feels like a never-ending loop of punishments and paperwork carved on goatskin, at least it's a loop you know. As you return to your own patch of earth, you spot your boundary stone right where you left it. You pat it. Just in case. The sun is dipping now, painting the fields in gold. You breathe deep. Even after a day like this, even with mud in your boots and worry in your gut, there's a strange peace in knowing tomorrow you won't have to stand in court again, at least until the goose attacks the rooster. Again. And someone calls it assault. Then you might just find yourself back in front of that bench, explaining poultry dynamics to a man who's never held a chicken in his life. It's still dark when you stir. Your body protests, hips, stiff fingers, curled from yesterday's cold, but you force yourself up, stepping over the sleeping limbs of your children, careful not to kick the dog. Outside, the air bites like a winter apple, crisp and thin. You can see your breath, and you can hear drums. No, not war drums. Market drums. The faint, rhythmic beating from the next village over market day has begun. Now, don't get excited. This isn't a glamorous shopping spree with sweet treats and trinkets. For a medieval peasant, the market is equal parts blessing and battlefield. It's your best shot at selling surplus, buying rare essentials, or, if you're lucky, hearing gossip spicier than your turnip stew. But it's also chaotic, exhausting, and full of people who think your dried beans are not worth their threadbare wool sock. Mainstream fact: medieval markets were critical economic hubs. Most were held weekly or monthly, and many were granted special charters by the king or local lords. They drew peasants, merchants, friars, peddlers, and pickpockets, sometimes all within a few muddy yards. You pack what you can, a small basket of onions, a slab of rough salt pork wrapped in old cloth, and a handful of eggs if the hens cooperated this week. You also bring your eldest son, mostly for muscle, but also so he can learn the noble art of haggling. You hand him the basket. He groans. The road to market is long-winding past hedgerows, patches of forest, and the ruins of a Roman road older than anyone you know. You pass others making the same pilgrimage, old Marga with her goose. Not that goose a baker from the next village whose teeth whistle when he talks, and a shepherd boy driving 3 half-sheared sheep with very clear opinions on walking in a straight line. When you arrive, it's like stepping into a carnival, only noisier and slightly more aggressive. Stalls are made from carts, crates, or just blankets on the ground. The smells hit first cheese aging to the edge of legality meat, roasting on open flames, fish that clearly traveled too long to get here. You wrinkle your nose and pull your cloak tighter. Quirky tidbit. In some markets, officials known as ale conners would literally sit in spilled ale to check if a tavern's benches were sticky, an early, soggy form of quality control. You thank the stars that your job isn't testing beer with your trousers. You find a corner to set up shop, laying out your goods in neat rows. Then the haggling begins. A woman pokes your onions and frowns like they insulted her mother. "Bit soft," she mutters. You resist the urge to say, "So's your bread." Instead, you smile thinly and offer 2 extra bulbs. Sale made. Next, a skinny man with a crooked nose offers to trade a belt for your pork. You ask if it's real leather. He says yes. You press a fingernail in and sniff. Goat. Old goat. You shake your head. Your son tries to barter with a sweet seller, offering a single egg for a honey cake the size of a button. They laugh him off. He looks betrayed. You'll explain supply and demand later. Around you, the market pulses with motion. There's a traveling monk preaching loudly about sin, completely ignoring the merchant beside him, selling dice and love charms. A group of musicians attempts to drown both out with bagpipes and an out-of-tune hurdy-gurdy. children dart through legs chasing a pig with a red ribbon on its tail. The pig is winning. Historians still argue whether markets truly empowered peasants or simply pulled them deeper into a system of dependency and debt. Some see markets as lively centers of rural capitalism, others as controlled environments where lords extracted fees, fines, and influence over every coin exchanged. You can see both sides, especially after paying your stall tax just to stand here. Yes, there's a fee. Everything has a fee. The market reeve approaches pouch in hand, brow expectant. You give him a few copper coins and resist asking what exactly they pay for. The mud still clings to your ankles, and there's no roof over your head. Still, there are small joys. You find a spool of thread in your wife's favorite blue, real blue, not gray, pretending to be cheerful. You barter 3 onions and a joke about the steward's boots for it. A good trade. You also get news. A traveler from the next shire says the king's soldiers are on the move again. No one's sure why. Another claims there's a new tax coming on firewood. That would be a disaster. One man swears he saw a comet last week and now refuses to eat cheese on Thursdays. Markets are the medieval version of the internet, a tangled mess of truth lies, and someone trying to sell you miracle herbs. By mid-afternoon, your goods are mostly gone. You've sold enough to buy a small sack of barley, some dried apples, and after a long negotiation, a small tin whistle for your youngest. He'll love it. You'll regret it. As you pack up, a brawl breaks out over a rigged scale. 2 men roll through the mud, wrestling over a half pint of sour ale. The market reeve watches with a sigh, then wades in. You make a mental note to avoid that stall next time. The walk home is quieter. Your son, now slightly richer and much more tired, chews a stale crust he traded for. You both trudge past the same hedgerows, the same Roman stones, but the weight in your arms is different. Less burden, more provision. By the time you reach your cottage, the sky has softened. The fire is warm, the stew smells edible, and your youngest squeals with delight over the whistle. He immediately blows it. Repeatedly. You pretend it doesn't bother you. Sort of. Despite the cold, the chaos, and the cost, the market gave you something rare choice. However small, however temporary, you were a buyer and a seller. Not just a servant. Not just a cog. Tomorrow you'll be back in the fields, answering to the reeve, cursing the stubborn soil. But tonight you wrap yourself in your cloak, chew a sliver of apple, and remember the din of the market, the scent, the color, the drumbeat of barter. And maybe, just maybe, you feel a little freer for it. The seasons shift again, as they always do, with more of a shrug than a flourish. Autumn now leans hard into winter, and frost rims the thatch like a warning. You step outside and crunch across the stiff grass. The animal's breath fogs the air like ghosts of warmer days. This morning you're not working the land. You're heading into the woods. Because if there's one thing a peasant must master, it's finding what they need where nobody else bothers to look. Today is all about foraging, and firewood, 2 essentials that should be simple, and yet somehow never are. Mainstream fact. While peasants technically had the right to gather firewood, they often weren't allowed to take it from the lord's forest without permission. That meant no chopping live trees, only gathering fallen branches known as estovers. Violating this could result in fines or, worse, a trip to the forest court. Yes, there was a whole court. For trees. So you grab your burlap sack and your small hatchet, not for cutting wood, heavens no. just in case you trip and it accidentally nicks a branch. It's best to have plausible deniability. The forest reeve is unpredictable. Your daughter joins you eager for mushrooms, berries, and maybe a squirrel sighting. You set off toward the woods, breath clouding the path, the frost crunching under your boots. The forest is still a tangle of gray limbs and wet leaves. It feels ancient, half asleep, but watchful. You nod to the twisted oak at the fork. Locals call it Old Bone. You've never asked why. Probably better that way. You both keep your eyes down. Firewood comes first. You gather fallen branches, dragging them into rough piles. Some are too wet to burn now, but might dry if you store them near the hearth. You glance around, heart ticking a bit faster. No sign of the reeve yet. Still better not risk it. You definitely didn't see that one nice dry stick fall naturally from the tree. It just ended up in your bundle. Quirky tidbit. In certain villages, peasants would disguise their firewood gathering as walking the pig. They'd bring a pig into the forest, and if anyone questioned their presence, they'd say they were just letting the pig root. Meanwhile, their sack mysteriously filled with twigs. Medieval multitasking at its finest. As your daughter skips ahead, she finds a clump of mushrooms. You check them carefully, nothing cursed-looking slimy or glowing. They'll do for tonight's stew. She also finds rose hips stubbornly clinging to their branches, and a few late blackberries shriveled but sweet. You carry on, watching the sun slice through the trees in thin, cold beams. Then you spot movement. Not a deer, not a pig. A man half hidden behind a holly bush. It's the forest reeve. Your stomach sinks, but you nod politely. He eyes your bundle with the suspicion of someone who truly enjoys his job too much. He asks if you've taken any live wood. You say no. He prods a stick with his boot, frowns, and moves on. You and your daughter exhale at the same time. Close one. Historians still argue whether forest laws were really as strict in practice as they were on parchment. Some suggest many lords turned a blind eye as long as peasants were discreet. Others insist the punishments ranging from steep fines to corporal punishment were enforced with zeal, especially in more profitable forests. One thing's clear: to be poor and cold near a well-protected wood was a kind of seasonal torment. You find a fallen log and sit. Your daughter feeds a nut to a squirrel who promptly drops it in panic and runs off. She laughs. You take a moment to just be. Here in the hush, the grind of village life fades. No reeve, no steward, just frost and bark and breath. Of course, peace never lasts. You hear shouting a group of boys from the next village stomping through the trees. One of them has a sling. Another has a rabbit still warm. Hunting. That's a serious risk. Catching animals in the forest is very illegal unless you're nobility or insanely lucky with plausible deniability. You and your daughter decide it's time to go. The firewood bundle is heavy enough now, and so is the mood. On the walk back, she asks why people can't just take what they need. You explain gently that the forest technically belongs to the Lord, that even though it's full of life and littered with dead branches, it's considered his property. She frowns and kicks a stone. But he doesn't even live here. Exactly. By the time you reach the village, your arms are sore and your fingers numb, but you've managed enough wood for a few warm nights. Maybe even a baked turnip if the hearth cooperates. At home, your wife takes the mushrooms and starts the stew. Your daughter brags about the squirrel. You make a show of pretending to believe it talked to her. You stack the wood carefully beside the door, proud of every branch legal or questionable. That night, as the fire crackles and the stew simmers, you feel the rare comfort of preparation. Winter is no joke, and you're not fully ready, but you're closer. You stare into the fire, letting the warmth push back the cold. Outside, the wind whispers through the trees like a reminder. Come spring, it all begins again. But for now, you've earned this peace. By now, your body's a ledger of aches and blisters. Knees that crack when you crouch a back that protests every sunrise and feet that never seem to fully warm. But worse than physical exhaustion is the threat of illness, because in the Middle Ages, when your body fails, there's not much between you and the abyss. You cough, just once. But it echoes oddly in your chest like a hollow drum. You try to ignore it. Illness is always lurking. A sniffle can turn serious in days, and a bad cut might as well be a letter to the grave. Sanitation is, let's say, more of a concept than a practice. You share your water source with animals, your home with fleas, and your air with neighbors who sneeze like they're casting spells. Mainstream fact peasant villages had no real medical infrastructure. Doctors were rare, expensive, and mostly for the nobility. The average villager depended on folk healers, herbal remedies, prayer, and a good dose of magical thinking. The word hygiene hadn't even been invented yet, probably too clean a word for a world this muddy. Your neighbor's wife has been sick for days. Fevered, thrashing eyes glassy. Some say it's a punishment from God. Others say she drank milk too close to sunset. One man swears it's because she stepped on a fairy ring last spring. No one really knows. You visit anyway, bringing a handful of dried sage and a whispered hope. Her husband thanks you with a nod. The room smells of sweat and sour breath. Her moans are rhythmic, like wind through a broken shutter. You offer the herbs and slip away before the priest arrives. Death seems to follow him like a shadow. Back at home, you try not to let your worry show. Your youngest has a runny nose. Your oldest has been quiet for days, which is not his usual setting. You touch foreheads and listen for rattling. So far, so good. That night, your wife mixes honey with garlic and onion, one of the few cures passed down that doesn't involve burying a toad under a new moon. You sip it with a grimace. Tastes like regret. Still better than bloodletting, which remains popular despite centuries of not working. Quirky tidbit. In some parts of Europe, people believed illness could be transferred to bread. You'd breathe or spit on a loaf, then toss it to a dog. If the dog died, congratulations, you're cured. If not, maybe try a different dog. And then someone says the word plague. Quietly, like it might hear. A merchant came through last week coughing pale. His horse foamed at the mouth. Was it just a cold? Or was it the plague? Historians still argue whether peasants truly grasped the biological nature of disease. Many accepted miasma theory, the idea that bad air caused sickness, while others blamed divine wrath or demonic possession. Regardless of the theory, the result was the same fear, isolation, desperation. You avoid the merchant's trail. You boil water longer. You hang herbs above your door not because you know they work, but because not doing it feels reckless. Then one night the bell tolls, not for time, for death. It rings out slowly, deliberately. Someone's gone. You don't even ask who it'll spread soon enough. The village shrinks again. Your priest speaks of endurance, of humility in suffering. But your faith, if we're honest, flickers. You can't help but wonder why the rich seem to live longer. Cleaner homes, better food, magic beds made of feathers and money. You try not to dwell. You have children. They watch you closely now, sensing the tension. You muster a smile. You tell a joke about the Reeves' bald patch. They laugh, genuine for a moment. You hold on to that. Then the sickness visits your house. It starts with a fever. Your eldest, the quiet one. He shivers through the night, murmuring nonsense. Your wife stays up with him, sponging his face, whispering prayers. You pace like a ghost, useless. You try every remedy you've heard, chamomile, willow bark, a poultice of mashed beets and vinegar. None of it helps. You finally summon the wise woman Old Marin, who smells like earth and nettles. She doesn't promise anything, just gets to work. She mutters chants, burns rosemary, rubs his feet with goose fat. She says he must want to stay. You sit beside her eyes, locked on your son's face. He groans. Then, on the third day, the fever breaks. He opens his eyes and asks for porridge. You nearly weep. You make the porridge with shaking hands, sweeter than usual, because life tastes better that way. You're still wary he's not out of the woods yet, but you allow yourself a little hope. The crisis has passed. This time, you think of the merchant, the bell, the old woman who didn't recover, the boy with the rabbit in the woods who hasn't been seen in days. You think of how many more winters your body can take, how fragile everything is. But then your son smiles, and you remember why you endure it all. That night, the fire burns a little brighter. You wrap your boy in every blanket you own. Your wife hums as she mends a tunic. Even the dog seems to sigh with relief. The village will mourn again. Illness will return. But tonight, you get to be one of the lucky ones. You've survived another scare. You're still here, and that, in the Middle Ages, is nothing short of a miracle. The wind bites hard this morning. It whips across the fields like it's angry someone's still trying to live here. Your fingers sting as you pull on worn boots and you can't feel your nose after 3 minutes outside. Winter has arrived in full force, and with it, survival becomes the only thing on the to-do list. This time of year, the world doesn't ask if you're ready. It just comes at you full tilt with icy mud and livestock that refuses to cooperate. The last of the carrots were dug up a week ago. The cabbage smells suspicious. And the roof, well, let's say mostly intact, is a generous description. The barn creaks in the cold, and the sheep have that wide-eyed look that says, yes, we might all freeze together. You scatter straw and hope it's enough. Mainstream fact, peasants spent most of the winter relying on whatever they managed to store in autumn. Salted meats, pickled vegetables, dried legumes, and grain. But there was often too little. Crop yields were unpredictable, and there was no such thing as a backup fridge. If the harvest was poor, famine was never far behind. You check the larder. 2 wheels of hard cheese, both speckled with what you choose to believe is the friendly kind of mold. A few onions, some oats. The salted pork you've been rationing like it's made of diamonds. It's not much, but it's all you've got. Your wife is patching a blanket for the 5th time. Your children wear every layer they own, which isn't saying much. The baby toddles around in mismatched wool socks like a drunken goblin, and honestly, it's the most cheerful thing you've seen all day. Outside, there's less work, but that doesn't mean no work. You still tend the animals' repair fences, haul water that freezes before you can even pour it. You've also taken to mending shoes and weaving baskets, trying to scrape together a little trade. anything to make the time pass and the stomachs stop growling. Quirky tidbit. Some medieval villages held winter storytelling contests in alehouses where the loser had to buy the next round. One documented story ends with a man turning into a goose to avoid his debts. Honestly relatable. At night, you gather with the rest of your family around the fire, your one true luxury. The hearth is the heart of the house now. Food is cooked there. Warmth radiates from it. Stories are told beside it. You rotate seating so everyone gets a turn closest to the flames. Your wife recounts a tale of St. Cuthbert, calming a storm by whispering to seagulls. Your daughter interrupts with a much scarier one about a woman who baked a demon into a pie. You all laugh, maybe a little too loudly. Hunger has a way of turning nervous giggles into full-on comedy hour. Historians still argue whether the so-called hungry gap in winter was truly universal across medieval Europe. In some regions with more stable growing cycles or access to preserved foods through trade peasants may have fared better. But in isolated villages like yours, where the granary is as moody as the steward's tax book, winter was often lean, gray, and long. You trade a few eggs for firewood with a neighbor, even though the hens barely lay in this cold. You help another patch a leaking roof in exchange for a wool scarf that smells strongly of goat. Transactions like these keep everyone going quiet, little lifelines strung between crumbling cottages. One night, your eldest child surprises you by fixing the loose board on the hearth. You hadn't even noticed them watching you do it last week. They smile proud, and for a second you forget about how empty the pantry feels. Because this is also what winter brings time. Time to notice your children growing up. Time to sit with your thoughts for better or worse. Time to remember names of people lost and the warmth of those still here. The village slows. People visit less. The roads ice over, turning the outside world into a rumor. News travels by foot, wrapped in wool and chapped hands. And then, one morning, it snows. Not just a flurry. A thick, blanketing, breathtaking fall. The kind that makes everything quiet. Every tree limb outlined, every rooftop softened. For a moment, even hardship feels hushed. You step outside and feel it land on your eyelashes. The children shriek and dive into it like it's a miracle. And maybe it is. You build a lopsided snow pig. The dog barks at it. The baby eats snow and looks extremely proud. Your wife laughs, and you catch her hand for just a second too long. Then, back inside, quick before the chill sets in deep. You warm your hands near the hearth, the smell of boiling oats somehow comforting, despite how many times you've had the same meal. You add a splash of goat's milk and pass bowls around. Tonight, you'll all sleep closer together. Not because of love, though yes, also that, but mostly because the combined body heat matters. You lie down, blanket up to your chin, listening to the slow crackle of firewood and the wind beyond the shutter. You've survived another day of medieval winter. Tomorrow you'll do it again. The fire settles to a quiet glow now. The room breathes in long, sleepy sighs. Outside, the wind has softened into nothing more than a hush against the shutters, a distant lullaby for those who know how to listen. The children sleep their faces peaceful and still for once. Even the dog curls tighter, its tail twitching like it's chasing rabbits in dreams. The house is wrapped in silence, warm, where it matters, held together by shared breath and stubbornness. You lie back, the straw mattress crinkling beneath you, and close your eyes. The aches in your hands and back seem softer now, just part of you like the rhythm of your heartbeat. You made it through another night in a world that's never been gentle, and somehow you're still here. Let your mind drift now. To spring fields, to sun-warmed earth, to the distant scent of elderflower. Let the heaviness fade. Let the noise of struggle grow distant. There will be more toil tomorrow, yes, but not yet. Not now. This moment is yours, and though the road behind you has been hard, and the one ahead, no doubt harder still, you've walked it with quiet courage. That counts for something. Maybe everything. So rest now, traveler of the past. Sleep deep beneath your thatched roof under stars as old as time. You've earned it. Good night.